Sarah Mitchell had always been the careful one in the family. At 28, she worked as a park ranger in the Rocky Mountains, spending her days guiding tourists through safe trails and teaching them about wildlife. Her younger brother Jake often teased her about being too cautious, but their parents appreciated having one child who never gave them sleepless nights. That Saturday morning in October started like any other weekend. Sarah had planned a solo hike on the Whispering Pines Trail, a moderate path she had walked hundreds of times. She left her small cabin at dawn, her backpack filled with the usual supplies: water, energy bars, first aid kit, and her emergency whistle. The autumn air was crisp, and the mountains wore their golden coat of changing leaves. Jake was supposed to meet her at the trail's end by 4 in the afternoon. They had planned to drive into town together for their mother's birthday dinner. Sarah never missed family gatherings, especially not their mother's special days. She had even picked out the perfect gift the week before: a handmade quilt from the local craft shop that reminded her of the one their grandmother used to have. When 4 o'clock came and went with no sign of Sarah, Jake wasn't immediately worried. His sister was known to stop and help other hikers or spend extra time photographing wildlife. But when 5:30 arrived and the parking lot remained empty except for his truck and Sarah's Jeep, a cold knot formed in his stomach. Jake called Sarah's phone repeatedly, but each call went straight to voicemail. The mountain had several dead zones where cell service disappeared completely, so this wasn't unusual. Still, something felt wrong. Sarah was never this late, especially not when family was waiting. By 6 o'clock, Jake had contacted the local ranger station. His friend Mike, who worked the evening shift, assured him that solo hikers often took longer than expected. "Give her until dark," Mike suggested. "You know Sarah. She probably found an injured animal or stopped to help someone else." But darkness fell with no word from Sarah. Jake's worry transformed into genuine fear when he realized that Sarah's emergency beacon, a device she always carried and regularly tested, hadn't sent any signals. Every ranger carried one, and Sarah was religious about keeping hers charged and functional. The search began at first light Sunday morning. Jake had barely slept, spending the night calling everyone Sarah knew, hoping she had decided to stay with a friend or had gone somewhere else entirely. But Sarah's landlord confirmed her bed hadn't been slept in, and her coworkers hadn't heard from her since Friday afternoon. 20 volunteers joined the official search and rescue team. They included fellow park rangers, local police officers, and experienced hikers who knew the mountain well. Jake's parents drove up from Denver, his mother's birthday dinner forgotten in the face of their growing panic. The search dogs picked up Sarah's scent immediately at the trailhead and followed it for the first 3 miles of the Whispering Pines trail. But then something strange happened. At a rocky outcrop known as Eagle's Rest, the dogs became confused. They circled the area repeatedly, whining and pawing at the ground, but couldn't determine which direction Sarah had gone. "It's like her scent just vanishes here," explained Maria Santos, the lead dog handler. She had been doing search and rescue work for 15 years and had never seen her dogs react this way. "Sometimes scent gets disrupted by weather or strong winds, but this is different. It's like she just disappeared." The search team spread out in all directions from Eagle's Rest. They combed through dense forest, checked every cave and crevice, and followed every possible path Sarah might have taken. Helicopters flew overhead, their thermal cameras scanning the mountainside for any sign of heat or movement. Jake hiked with one of the search teams, his eyes scanning every tree and boulder for any trace of his sister. He knew these mountains almost as well as Sarah did, having grown up exploring them during family camping trips. Every fallen log and unusual rock formation caught his attention, hope and dread battling in his chest with each discovery that turned out to be nothing. By Sunday evening, the search had expanded to cover over 50 square miles. The teams had found a few pieces of fabric caught on branches that might have been from Sarah's blue hiking jacket, but nothing definitive. Her emergency whistle remained silent and her phone continued going to voicemail. The local news picked up the story by Monday morning. Sarah's photo appeared on television screens across Colorado, a smiling woman with kind eyes and shoulder-length brown hair, wearing her park ranger uniform. The reporter described her as an experienced hiker who knew the mountains intimately, making her disappearance all the more puzzling. Tips began pouring in from the public. Someone claimed to have seen a woman matching Sarah's description at a gas station 50 miles away. Another caller reported hearing whistles echoing through a different mountain range entirely. Each lead was investigated thoroughly, but none provided any real answers. Jake took a leave of absence from his job as a construction foreman to join the search full-time. He couldn't eat, could barely sleep, and refused to leave the mountain. His parents tried to convince him to come home and rest, but he insisted on staying at Sarah's cabin, surrounded by her belongings and the familiar places she loved. On Tuesday night, as Jake sat on Sarah's porch looking out at the dark mountains, he made a decision that would haunt him for years. He convinced himself that Sarah had fallen somewhere along the trail, perhaps into a hidden ravine or down a steep cliff face where the search teams hadn't been able to reach. The rational part of his mind knew that Sarah was too experienced to make such a careless mistake. She had taught him everything he knew about mountain safety, always emphasizing the importance of staying on marked trails and being aware of unstable ground. But grief and exhaustion had worn down his logic, leaving only the desperate need for an explanation that made sense. When the official search was scaled back after a week, Jake felt like he was abandoning his sister. The professionals assured him they would continue monitoring the area and following up on any new leads, but the intensive daily searches would end. Most missing hikers, they gently explained, were found within the first 72 hours. Jake finally returned to Denver, hollow-eyed and broken. He helped his parents plan a memorial service, though they all agreed to wait a few more weeks, clinging to the hope that Sarah might still be found alive. The local newspaper ran a final story about the search, concluding that experienced hiker Sarah Mitchell had likely suffered a fatal fall in the remote wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. But deep in the mountains, in places where no search team had thought to look, Sarah Mitchell was very much alive, and she was learning things about survival, about herself, and about the mountain that no ranger training had ever prepared her for. Sarah's memory of what happened at Eagle's Rest remained fractured, like pieces of a puzzle scattered by the wind. She remembered stopping to photograph a golden eagle soaring overhead, its wings catching the morning light. She remembered stepping closer to the edge of the rocky outcrop to get a better angle, her camera raised to capture the perfect shot. What came next existed only in flashes, the sensation of falling, not down a cliff as everyone would assume, but sideways, as if the ground itself had opened like a door. There was no pain, no impact, just a strange, weightless feeling, and then darkness so complete it seemed to have substance. When consciousness returned, Sarah found herself in what appeared to be a vast underground chamber. Soft, silvery light emanated from the walls themselves, revealing smooth stone surfaces that seemed almost organic in their curves and formations. The air was warm and carried a faint scent of minerals and something else, something alive but not quite familiar. Her first instinct was to check for injuries, but her body felt surprisingly fine. No broken bones, no cuts or bruises that should have resulted from such a fall. Her backpack was still with her, its contents undisturbed. Even more puzzling, her watch showed only an hour had passed since she had stopped at Eagle's Rest, though the journey to this place felt like it had taken much longer. Sarah tried calling out, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. The sound seemed to travel farther than it should have, bouncing back with an almost musical quality. She reached for her emergency whistle, but when she blew it, no sound emerged. The whistle worked perfectly. She could feel the air passing through it, but whatever frequency it produced was swallowed by the strange acoustics of the chamber. Her phone showed no signal, which wasn't surprising given what appeared to be solid rock overhead. But when she tried to use the flashlight function, the screen flickered and died despite showing a full battery moments before. Her emergency beacon, which should have been automatically transmitting her location, remained stubbornly dark. The chamber had several tunnels leading away from it, each one glowing with the same soft light that came from the walls. Sarah chose what seemed to be the largest tunnel, hoping it might lead to an exit. She had been trained in cave navigation, though nothing in her experience had prepared her for passages that seemed to bend space itself, where walking straight ahead somehow led to places that should have been impossible to reach. Time moved differently in this place. Sarah's watch continued running, but the hours it showed didn't match her sense of how long she had been walking. Sometimes she felt like she had been underground for days. Other times it seemed like only minutes had passed since her fall. Hunger and thirst came and went in ways that made no logical sense. The tunnels were filled with wonders that challenged everything Sarah thought she knew about geology and physics. She found chambers where water flowed upward in perfect spirals, defying gravity with serene indifference. In another room, she discovered what appeared to be living crystal formations that pulsed with their own internal light, growing and changing shape as she watched. But it wasn't just the physical impossibilities that marked this place as something beyond ordinary understanding. Sarah began to notice that her thoughts were clearer here, her senses sharper. She could hear sounds that shouldn't exist, the whisper of stone growing, the quiet conversations of underground rivers, the deep breathing of the mountain itself, on what her watch claimed was the third day. Though Sarah's internal clock insisted it had been both longer and shorter, she encountered the first sign that others had been here before her. In a narrow passage lined with formations that looked like frozen waterfalls, she found scratched marks on the wall. Not random scratches, but deliberate markings that formed a kind of map. The markings were old, worn smooth by time and the touch of many hands. But they were also fresh, as if someone had just finished updating them. Following these guides, Sarah discovered that she wasn't the only living being in this underground realm. In a chamber that felt like a natural cathedral, its ceiling lost in shadows high above, Sarah met the others. There were 7 of them, men and women ranging in age from a teenager to an elderly man with a white beard. They wore clothes from different time periods, the girl in modern hiking gear like Sarah's own, the old man in what looked like clothing from the early 1900s. They greeted Sarah without surprise, as if they had been expecting her. Their leader, a middle-aged woman named Elena, explained that they were all people who had fallen through at various times over the past century. Each had been hiking or climbing in the mountains when they had somehow slipped into this place that existed between the ordinary world and something else entirely. Elena had been a geology professor before her disappearance 15 years earlier. Her research into unusual mineral formations in the Rockies had led her to Eagle's Rest on a day much like Sarah's. She had been officially declared dead after an extensive search found no trace of her. Just as would happen with Sarah, the teenager, Marcus, had vanished during a school camping trip only 2 years ago. The authorities had concluded he had fallen into a river and been swept away, despite the fact that he had been an excellent swimmer and the water levels were low that autumn. His family had held a funeral with an empty casket. Each member of the group had a similar story. Experienced outdoors people who had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind families who eventually concluded they had died in accidents. The mountain, it seemed, had been selecting people for this purpose for a very long time. But why? That question haunted Sarah as Elena showed her around their underground community. They had built a surprisingly comfortable existence in this impossible place. Food appeared in the form of strange but nutritious fungi that grew in certain chambers. Water was abundant and always clean. They had even found ways to create tools and furniture from the malleable stone-like material that formed many of the structures. The answer came gradually, revealed through conversations with Elena and the others over what passed for days in this timeless place. They weren't prisoners but guardians. The mountain was alive in ways that science had never suspected, and it needed protectors, people who could understand its needs and help maintain the delicate balance that kept both the underground realm and the world above stable. Elena showed Sarah places where the mountain was injured, chambers where the living stone was cracked and dying, passages where the natural flow of energy had been disrupted. These wounds were caused by activities on the surface, mining operations, construction projects, pollution that seeped down through the soil. The Guardians worked to heal these injuries using techniques that seemed part science and part something that had no name. Sarah learned that she had been chosen not randomly, but specifically. Her years as a park ranger, her deep love for the mountains, her knowledge of both the natural world and the people who visited it, all of these qualities made her valuable to the mountain's purposes. She had been watched for years before being brought to this place. The realization that she might never return to her old life hit Sarah like a physical blow. Jake, her parents, her co-workers, they all believed she was dead. They had probably held a memorial service by now, grieved for her, and begun the slow process of moving on. Meanwhile, she was more alive than she had ever been, but in a place that existed outside the normal flow of time and space. Elena saw Sarah's distress and sat with her in one of the quieter chambers, a place where the stone walls showed images of the world above like living photographs. "The hardest part isn't learning to live here," she said gently. "It's accepting that the person you were before, that person really did die when you fell through. Who you become here is someone new, someone with different responsibilities and different purposes." Sarah spent months learning the ways of the mountain, though time flowed so strangely in the underground realm that months might have been years or might have been weeks in the world above. Elena became her teacher, showing her how to read the subtle signs that indicated the mountain's health, how to channel the strange energy that flowed through the living stone, and how to repair the damage caused by the surface world's activities. The work was unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. In one chamber, she learned to sing specific tones that encouraged crystal formations to grow in patterns that strengthened the mountain's structure. In another, she discovered how to direct underground water flow to carry healing minerals to injured areas. The mountain itself seemed to guide her hands and voice, teaching her through a kind of intuition that bypassed normal learning. But even as Sarah grew more skilled at her new role, she couldn't forget the life she had left behind. The stone walls sometimes showed her glimpses of the surface world, and she saw Jake visiting Eagle's Rest repeatedly, leaving flowers and talking to empty air as if she could hear him. Her parents had aged visibly in the time since her disappearance, their grief carving new lines in their faces. The hardest moment came when the stone walls revealed Jake on the anniversary of her disappearance. He had brought a small memorial plaque to mount at Eagle's Rest, engraved with her name and the words, "She loved these mountains." Sarah watched through tears as her brother knelt at the exact spot where she had fallen through, his shoulders shaking with sobs he had held back for an entire year. Elena found Sarah weeping in that chamber and sat beside her in understanding silence. "It never gets easier," the older woman finally said. "But you learn to carry the pain differently. Your love for them doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the work we do here. Every healing we perform, every injury we prevent, we do it partly for the people we left behind." As Sarah's skills developed, she began to understand the true scope of what the Guardians protected. The mountain was not just a geographical feature, but a kind of anchor point that helped maintain stability across hundreds of miles of wilderness. When earthquakes threatened the region, the Guardians worked together to redirect the energy through safe channels. When pollution from distant cities began to poison underground water sources, they found ways to filter and purify the flow. Their most important work, however, involved something Elena called the calling. Sometimes the mountain would identify people who were in immediate danger in the wilderness above. Lost hikers, injured climbers, people who would die without intervention. The Guardians could project their consciousness to the surface, becoming invisible guides who led rescue teams to the right locations or helped lost souls find their way to safety. Sarah's first experience with the calling came during a blizzard that struck the mountains without warning. A family of 4, parents with 2 young children, had been caught on a trail far from shelter when the storm hit. The mountain showed Sarah their location through the stone walls. They were huddled behind a large boulder, inadequately dressed for the sudden temperature drop. With night approaching and no rescue team aware of their situation, Elena guided Sarah through the process of projecting her consciousness to the surface. It was like stepping out of her body while remaining anchored to it, becoming a presence that could move through the physical world without being part of it. Sarah found herself standing in the swirling snow beside the terrified family, invisible to their eyes but able to influence their decisions. The father was panicking, wanting to try to make it back to their car despite the dangerous conditions. Sarah whispered suggestions into his mind, not words he could hear but impulses that felt like his own thoughts. She guided him to notice a trail marker he had missed, showing him a path that led to an emergency shelter built by the Park Service just half a mile away. As the family followed the route Sarah's influence suggested, she felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This was why she was here, why the mountain had chosen her. Her disappearance had caused pain for those she loved, but it had also positioned her to save lives in ways she never could have managed as an ordinary park ranger. The calling became Sarah's specialty among the Guardians. Her years of experience with mountain rescue and her intimate knowledge of the trail systems made her uniquely qualified for this work. Over the following seasons, she guided dozens of lost hikers to safety, helped rescue teams locate injured climbers, and even prevented several potential accidents by steering people away from unstable ground or dangerous weather. conditions. But the more Sarah learned about the mountain's needs and the more lives she helped save, the more she began to understand that her situation might not be as permanent as Elena had originally suggested. The mountain did not keep its guardians forever. Some, like the old man with the white beard, had been there for decades, but others had eventually returned to the surface world when their time of service was complete. Elena was reluctant to discuss this possibility at first, warning Sarah not to get her hopes up. The mountain decided when a guardian's work was finished, and there was no way to predict or influence that decision. Some guardians had begged to return home and had been refused. Others who had found peace in the underground realm had been sent back against their wishes. The key, Elena explained, seemed to be related to a guardian's ability to find balance between their love for their old life and their dedication to their new purpose. Those who remained trapped by grief and longing rarely earned their freedom, while those who completely forgot their former lives often stayed underground permanently. The mountain valued guardians who could hold both their past and present selves in harmony. This revelation transformed Sarah's approach to her work and her memories. Instead of trying to forget Jake and her parents, she began incorporating her love for them into every task she performed. When she healed damaged stone, she thought of protecting the mountains her family had always loved. When she guided lost hikers, she remembered Jake's tendency to take unnecessary risks and channeled her desire to keep him safe. The change in Sarah's energy was noticed by the mountain itself. The living stone responded more readily to her touch. The healing songs came more naturally to her voice, and her projections to the surface world became stronger and more precise. She was learning to be both Sarah the guardian and Sarah the sister, daughter and friend. One day, as Sarah worked in a chamber deep within the mountain's heart, repairing damage caused by a mining operation miles away, she felt a familiar presence. Jake was above ground at Eagle's Rest again, but this time he wasn't alone. He had brought a friend, a fellow construction worker who was struggling with depression after his wife's death. Jake was trying to help by showing him the place where Sarah had disappeared, talking about how she had loved the mountains and found peace in nature. Through the stone walls, Sarah could see that Jake's friend was in more danger than her brother realized. The man's grief had brought him to Eagle's Rest with darker purposes than Jake knew. He was planning to end his own life at the same spot where Sarah had vanished, seeing it as a peaceful place to die. Sarah felt the mountain stir around her, recognizing a calling more urgent than any she had experienced before. But this time, the situation was personal in a way that made everything different. She was being asked to save a life, but doing so would require revealing herself to Jake in ways that might change everything. Elena found Sarah preparing for the projection and immediately understood what was happening. "This is why you're here," she said simply. "Not just to be a guardian, but to be the bridge between the mountain's wisdom and the people you love. The mountain has been preparing you for this moment since the day you fell through." Sarah's projection to the surface felt different this time. Instead of the usual weightless sensation of consciousness moving through space, she felt herself becoming more solid, more present. The mountain was allowing her a stronger manifestation than ever before, though she remained invisible to normal sight. She emerged from the stone at Eagle's Rest to find Jake sitting on a fallen log, talking earnestly to his friend David. The other man sat hunched over, his hands clasped tightly together, his face showing the hollow expression Sarah had learned to recognize in people who had lost hope. Jake was trying to share memories of Sarah, describing how she had found strength in these mountains even during difficult times. "She always said the mountains had a way of putting things in perspective," Jake was saying, "like they'd been here for millions of years and would be here long after we're gone, so our problems weren't as big as they seemed." David nodded politely, but Sarah could see the darkness in his thoughts. He was only half listening to Jake, his mind focused on the plan he had made. He had chosen this spot because Jake's stories made it sound peaceful, a place where someone could slip away from the world without causing additional trauma to others. Sarah moved closer, trying to project calming energy the way Elena had taught her. But David's despair was like a wall around his mind, resistant to gentle influence. She needed to do something more direct, something that went against everything she had learned about Guardian protocol. The mountain seemed to sense her dilemma. The stone beneath her feet warmed, and she felt the ancient consciousness that dwelt in the rock offering her more power, more presence. She could become visible if she chose, could speak to Jake and David directly, but doing so would reveal secrets that were not meant for the surface world, and there might be no way back to her guardian existence afterward. Sarah thought of Elena's words about balance, about holding both her past and present selves in harmony. Maybe this moment was the test she had been unconsciously preparing for. Not a choice between her old life and her new purpose, but a way to serve both simultaneously. As David stood up and walked toward the edge of the rocky outcrop, Sarah made her decision. She called upon every bit of power the mountain had shared with her, every skill she had learned in healing and projection, and used it all to make herself visible. Jake saw her first. He had been watching David with growing concern, starting to realize that his friend's interest in this place might not be as innocent as he had assumed. When a familiar figure materialized near the spot where Sarah had disappeared 3 years earlier, Jake's first thought was that grief and worry had finally made him hallucinate. But Sarah looked exactly as she had the day she vanished. Same clothes, same backpack, even the same camera hanging around her neck. She stood with the confident posture Jake remembered, but there was something different in her eyes, a depth that spoke of experiences beyond ordinary understanding. "Jake," she said, and her voice carried on the mountain air with perfect clarity. "I need you to listen very carefully." Jake stumbled backward, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. "Sarah, but we had a memorial service. We buried an empty coffin." David had stopped at the cliff edge, turning to look at the strange conversation happening behind him. To his eyes, Jake appeared to be talking to empty air, which only confirmed David's belief that grief could drive people to madness. "I'm not dead," Sarah said, stepping closer to Jake while keeping one eye on David. "I never died. I fell through to somewhere else, somewhere that exists inside the mountain. I've been learning, growing, helping people, and right now I need to help David." She turned to face David directly. "David, I know why you came here today. I know about the pills in your pocket and the note in your car, but this isn't the place for that. This mountain has work for you to do." David's eyes widened as Sarah became visible to him as well. The despair that had clouded his thoughts began to crack, replaced by confusion and wonder. "Who are you? How do you know about—" "I'm someone who understands loss," Sarah said gently. "I've been where you are now, feeling like the world would be better without me. But I've learned that our pain has purpose, that our experiences, even the worst ones, prepare us to help others." Jake was still staring at his sister, his rational mind warring with the evidence of his senses. "Sarah, where have you been? Mom and Dad think you're dead." "We've been mourning you for 3 years." "I know," Sarah said, and the sorrow in her voice was ancient and deep. "I've watched you all. I've seen your grief. It breaks my heart every day. But I couldn't come back until now, couldn't risk revealing this place until the mountain decided it was time." She gestured to the landscape around them, and for a moment both men could see what Sarah saw: the living energy flowing through the stone, the network of consciousness that connected every rock and tree, the delicate balance that held the entire ecosystem together. "The mountain chose me to be a guardian," Sarah explained. "There are others like me, people who fell through at different times, all working to protect this place and everyone who depends on it. We prevent earthquakes, we clean polluted water, we guide rescue teams to lost hikers. We do work that saves thousands of lives, but we can only do it from the other side." David moved away from the cliff edge, drawn by Sarah's words. "The other side of what?" "Reality," Sarah said simply. "The mountain exists in more dimensions than most people can perceive. What you see as solid rock is actually alive, aware, and desperately trying to maintain balance in a world that's changing too fast for natural adaptation." She looked directly at David, her eyes full of compassion. "Your wife's death wasn't meaningless, David. The grief you're carrying isn't just personal pain. It's preparation for understanding other people's suffering. The mountain has been calling to you, trying to get your attention, because it needs someone with your particular combination of experience and sensitivity." Jake shook his head, struggling to accept what he was hearing. "This is impossible, Sarah. People don't just disappear into magic mountains. There has to be a rational explanation." "There is," Sarah said. "It's just a much bigger rational than most people are ready to accept. The universe is full of things that science hasn't discovered yet. Places where consciousness and matter interact in ways our current understanding can't explain." She walked over to the exact spot where she had originally fallen through. The stone there looked ordinary to casual observation, but Jake could see a faint shimmer in the air above it, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. I can show you, Sarah offered. Both of you. You can see the realm where I've been living. Meet the other guardians, understand what we're really protecting. But I need you to know that once you've seen it, you'll never be able to pretend the world is as simple as you thought it was. David stepped forward immediately. Show me. Whatever this is, it has to be better than the emptiness I've been living with. Jake hesitated longer, torn between his desperate desire to have his sister back and his fear of losing his grip on everything he thought he knew about reality. If I go with you, can I come back? Can I tell Mom and Dad you're alive? Sarah's expression grew sad. I don't know, Jake. The mountain decides these things, not me. But I can promise you this, whatever happens, you'll understand why I had to stay away. And you'll know that every day I've been gone has been spent doing something that matters. She held out her hands to both men. The choice is yours. Stay here with your questions and your pain, or trust me enough to see what I've learned about the real nature of love, loss, and purpose. David took her left hand immediately, his desperation overriding his fear. After a long moment, Jake grasped her right hand, unable to bear the thought of losing his sister again. The world shimmered around them, and Eagle's Rest dissolved into light. Jake's first sensation was of falling, but not down, sideways through space that bent and folded around them like liquid light. The journey felt both instantaneous and eternal, as if they were traveling vast distances while remaining perfectly still. When the movement finally stopped, they stood in the great cathedral chamber where Sarah had first met the other guardians. The soft, silvery light emanating from the living stone walls made everything appear dreamlike, but Jake could feel the solid rock beneath his feet and smell the mineral-rich air that carried hints of something indefinably ancient. David stood beside him with wonder replacing the despair that had clouded his features for months. Elena approached them with the calm dignity Jake remembered from his sister's descriptions. The other guardians gathered around Marcus, still looking like the teenager he had been when he disappeared, the elderly man with the white beard, and several others Sarah had mentioned but Jake had only half believed were real. Welcome to the heart of the mountain, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years learning to work with forces beyond ordinary comprehension. Sarah has told us about both of you. The mountain has been preparing for this meeting longer than you might imagine. Jake looked around the impossible chamber, his engineering background struggling to process architecture that seemed to flow like water, while remaining solid as granite. How is any of this possible? Rock doesn't emit light. Spaces this large can't exist inside a mountain without massive structural support. Your science is based on studying the mountain's sleeping state, Elena explained patiently. What you're seeing now is what happens when the stone is fully awake and aware. Matter behaves differently when it's conscious. David moved toward one of the flowing formations, reaching out tentatively to touch its surface. The stone responded to his proximity, brightening slightly and producing a soft harmonic tone. It's singing, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. The mountain is singing. Sarah joined David by the formation, placing her hand next to his on the warm stone. It's welcoming you. The mountain recognizes grief because it has grieved too. For forests that have been clear-cut, for rivers that have been poisoned, for species that have gone extinct. Your pain resonates with its pain. Elena gestured for them to follow her deeper into the chamber complex. As they walked, she explained the history of the Guardians, the nature of their work, and the delicate balance they helped maintain between the underground realm and the surface world. Jake listened with the part of his mind that had always been fascinated by complex systems, but his heart remained focused on his sister. She looked healthy and strong, but there was something almost ethereal about her now, as if she existed partly in this dimension and partly somewhere else entirely. Sarah, he said during a quiet moment, as Elena showed David how to read the energy patterns in the stone walls. Do you miss us? Do you miss your old life? Every single day, Sarah replied without hesitation. But missing you and loving you has become part of who I am as a guardian. When I heal the mountain, I think about protecting the places our family used to camp. When I guide lost hikers, I remember all the times you took risks that scared me. My love for you hasn't diminished. It's become the foundation of everything I do here. She led Jake to a chamber she hadn't shown David, a place where the stone walls displayed moving images like living photographs. Watch, she said, touching the wall in a specific pattern. The stone showed scenes from Jake's life over the past 3 years, his struggle with guilt over not searching harder for her, His parents' slow journey through grief, his decision to change careers from construction to wilderness rescue training so he could help prevent other families from experiencing their loss. "You became a search and rescue volunteer because of me," Sarah observed. "You've already saved 6 people in situations where they might have died. The mountain has been watching your work, just as it watched mine before I fell through." Jake stared at the images, seeing his own actions from a perspective he had never considered. "You're saying the mountain guided me to become a rescuer? I'm saying the mountain recognizes people who have the potential to help others, and it finds ways to nurture that potential," Sarah explained. "Your grief transformed you into someone who saves lives. David's experience with loss has given him the empathy needed to understand the mountain's own suffering." They returned to find David deep in conversation with Marcus about the nature of time in the underground realm. The teenager was explaining how he had watched his own family through the stone walls, seeing his younger sister grow up and graduate from high school, his parents slowly heal from the trauma of his disappearance. "The hardest part," Marcus was saying, "is knowing that they're living good lives without me. My sister became a marine biologist because she wanted to understand what happened to me near the water. She's doing amazing work protecting coral reefs now. My disappearance gave her a purpose she might never have found otherwise." Elena had been listening to their conversation with the expression of someone weighing a difficult decision. Finally, she spoke. "The mountain has been very clear about why you're both here. Jake, your work as a surface rescuer has been valuable, but there are limits to what you can accomplish from above ground. The mountain wants to offer you the chance to do what Sarah does, to project your consciousness to guide rescue teams with perfect knowledge of terrain and conditions." She turned to David. "And you have a different gift that we desperately need. Your experience with profound loss has given you the ability to communicate with people who are suicidal, people who come to the mountains planning to end their lives. You could become a guardian specifically focused on preventing those tragedies." Jake felt his world tilting on its axis. "You're asking me to disappear too? To let my parents think they've lost both their children?" "No," Elena said gently. "We're offering you something unprecedented. The mountain has grown stronger over the years, more able to maintain contact with the surface world. If you choose to join us, you could split your time between both realms. You could continue your rescue work above ground while also serving as a guardian below." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "That's never been offered to anyone before." "The circumstances have never been right before," Elena replied. "The mountain has been preparing for this possibility since the day Sarah arrived. It needs guardians who can move freely between worlds, who can serve as bridges between the ancient wisdom of the stone and the modern challenges of the surface." David stepped forward eagerly. "What about me? Could I do the same thing?" Elena studied him carefully. "Your path would be different. The mountain wants you to become fully committed to guardian work, at least initially. Your depression has brought you to a point where you're ready to completely transform your existence. But after you've learned to work with the stone's healing energy, after you've saved the lives you're meant to save, you might also earn the right to move between worlds." Jake looked at his sister, seeing both the hope and fear in her expression. "If I agree to this, could you come home sometimes too? Could you see Mom and Dad again?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Elena, is that possible?" The older woman was quiet for a long moment, her hand pressed against the stone wall as if consulting with the mountain itself. "The mountain says that Sarah's time as a full guardian is nearly complete. She has learned what she needed to learn and taught what she needed to teach. If Jake agrees to take on guardian responsibilities, Sarah could gradually transition back to the surface world." The chamber fell silent except for the soft harmonics that always filled the air in the mountain's heart. Jake understood that he was being offered something extraordinary, the chance to continue his rescue work with abilities beyond anything he had imagined, and the possibility of bringing his sister home to their grieving parents. But it would mean accepting a reality that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. It would mean keeping secrets that could never be shared with most people. It would mean becoming something more than human and less simultaneously. David broke the silence first. "I accept," he said firmly. "I came to that mountain today planning to die. If you're offering me a chance to live and help others live, then yes, I want to become a guardian." All eyes turned to Jake. Sarah reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and completely real. "It's your choice, Jake. No one will force you. But if you say yes, we could work together. We could save people the way you've always wanted to save them, but with knowledge and abilities that make rescue work truly effective. Jake thought about the hikers he had failed to reach in time during his 3 years as a volunteer rescuer. He thought about his parents aging with grief and the hollow hope that their daughter might somehow still be alive. He thought about David, whose transformation from suicidal despair to eager purpose had happened in the space of a single conversation. "If I do this," Jake said slowly, "how do I explain my absences to people above ground? How do I maintain a normal life while also being a guardian?" Elena smiled. "The same way Sarah will learn to do it. You become someone who takes frequent solo camping trips, someone who needs time alone in the wilderness to recharge. The mountain will provide cover stories and ensure that your absences are never questioned too closely." Jake looked around the impossible chamber one more time, at the living stone that pulsed with ancient awareness, at the other guardians who had found purpose in letting go of their old identities, at his sister who had become something magnificent in her 3 years of supposed death. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'll do it." The mountain's response was immediate and overwhelming. Light blazed from every surface, and Jake felt something vast and benevolent enter his consciousness, sharing knowledge and power that transformed his understanding of himself and the world. When the sensation faded, he knew he would never be the same person who had climbed to Eagle's Rest that morning. But for the first time since Sarah's disappearance, he felt complete. 6 months later, Jake sat across from his parents at their kitchen table in Denver, watching their faces as Sarah told them the carefully prepared version of her story. She had returned to the surface world gradually, making contact first with Jake during one of his solo camping trips, then slowly reintegrating into surface life with a cover story about amnesia and gradual memory recovery. "I remember falling," Sarah said, her hand wrapped around a cup of coffee that had grown cold while she spoke, "and then nothing until I woke up in a hospital in Wyoming. The doctor said I had severe head trauma and no identification. I spent 2 years in a care facility, not knowing who I was or where I came from." Their mother, Helen, reached across the table to grasp Sarah's other hand. "But why didn't anyone contact us? Why didn't you appear in any missing person databases?" Jake had helped Sarah prepare for this question. "There was a mix-up with the paperwork. I was registered as a Jane Doe from a different state. It wasn't until my memories started coming back that I could give them enough information to figure out who I really was." Their father, Robert, had been listening with the careful attention of a man who had spent 3 years preparing himself to never see his daughter again. "The important thing is that you're home now," he said quietly. "We don't need to understand everything that happened. We just need to know you're safe." Sarah's eyes filled with tears at the simple acceptance in his voice. The guilt of the deception was one of the hardest parts of her transition back to surface life, but Elena had been firm about the need for secrecy. The mountain's existence had to be protected, and the truth about the Guardians was too dangerous to share with people who weren't called to that purpose. Over the following months, Sarah and Jake developed a routine that allowed them to maintain their guardian responsibilities while rebuilding their surface relationships. They took turns spending time underground, with one always available for family dinners and regular life, while the other worked with Elena and the expanding group of Guardians. David had adapted to Guardian life with remarkable speed, his natural empathy allowing him to connect with the mountain's consciousness in ways that surprised even Elena. His specialty became working with people who came to the wilderness carrying thoughts of suicide, and his intervention rate was nearly perfect. Through careful guidance and invisible influence, he had already prevented 12 attempts and helped connect struggling individuals with the support they needed. Sarah's role evolved as well. Instead of being a full-time guardian, she became something new, a bridge between the mountain's wisdom and the surface world's conservation efforts. She returned to work as a park ranger, but with knowledge and abilities that made her incredibly effective at protecting the wilderness she served. Her fellow rangers noticed the change in her immediately. Sarah seemed to have an uncanny ability to predict weather patterns, to know exactly where to find lost hikers, and to identify environmental problems before they became serious. Her reputation grew quickly, and she was soon invited to consult on conservation projects across the entire Rocky Mountain region. Jake's rescue work became legendary among the mountain rescue community. He never seemed to lose a victim, never searched in the wrong direction, never failed to find someone who could still be saved. Other rescuers started requesting to work with him specifically, and training programs began studying his methods to understand his apparently supernatural success rate. The secret was the consciousness projection abilities he had learned as a guardian. During rescue operations, Jake could send his awareness far ahead of the physical search teams, locating victims with perfect accuracy and understanding their condition and needs before any human rescuer could reach them. He guided helicopters to landing zones that shouldn't have been visible from the air, led ground teams through terrain that should have been impassable, and always seemed to know exactly how much time they had before a victim's condition became critical. But the most profound change was in their family relationships. Helen and Robert, who had spent 3 years living with a grief-shaped hole in their lives, slowly began to heal in ways they had never expected. Sarah's return didn't erase the pain they had endured, but it transformed that pain into something that strengthened rather than diminished them. Helen threw herself into supporting other families of missing persons, using her experience to help them navigate the complex emotions of hope and despair. Robert began volunteering with search and rescue organizations, his motivation being to ensure that other families would have better outcomes than his had seemed to have. The ripple effects extended far beyond their immediate family. Sarah's work as a ranger influenced park policies that better protected wilderness areas. Jake's rescue successes inspired improvements in search and rescue techniques that saved lives across the region. David's prevention of suicides removed not just immediate tragedy, but all the secondary trauma those deaths would have caused for families and communities. And the first anniversary of Jake and David's initiation as guardians, the three of them stood together in the cathedral chamber, reporting to Elena and the mountain consciousness about their year of dual existence. "The experiment has exceeded all expectations," Elena observed, her hand pressed against the living stone as she communicated with the ancient awareness that dwelt in the mountain's heart. "The mountain is pleased with the bridge you've built between the worlds. Other sites are beginning to stir, other places where guardians might be needed." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and concern at this news. "You mean there are other mountains like this one?" "Not mountains necessarily," Elena replied, "but other places where the consciousness of the earth is concentrated, where the boundary between dimensions is thin enough for guardians to cross. Old forests, certain rivers, some desert formations. The mountain has been in contact with them, sharing what it has learned about working with human guardians." Jake understood the implications immediately. "You're talking about expanding this system worldwide." "Eventually," Elena confirmed, "but slowly, carefully, with the right people called to the right places. The Earth is facing challenges that require cooperation between human consciousness and the natural world's ancient wisdom. What we've built here is a model for that cooperation." David looked around the chamber at the other guardians, some of whom he now knew were preparing for their own transitions back to surface life. "What happens to us as more people join this work?" "You become teachers," Elena said simply. "You learn to identify and train others who have the potential to serve as guardians. You help expand the network of protection and healing that the Earth desperately needs." As they prepared to return to the surface that night, Sarah paused at the spot where she had first materialized 3 years earlier. The chamber looked exactly the same, but she understood now that her perception of it had completely transformed. What had once seemed like an alien realm now felt like home, and what had once been her entire world above ground now felt like one part of a much larger existence. Jake joined her at the chamber's center. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Sarah considered the question seriously. "About the pain we caused Mom and Dad?" "Yes, always." "About the time we lost with them?" "Absolutely." "But about the choice to become guardians?" "Never." The mountain knew what it was doing when it chose us, Jake reflected. It needed people who could love deeply enough to sacrifice for others, but who were also strong enough to find ways to serve both purposes. David approached them, carrying a small crystal formation that Elena had given him as a graduation gift. He would be returning to the surface permanently in a few weeks, ready to begin his new life as a bridge guardian like Sarah and Jake. "I keep thinking about that day at Eagle's Rest," he said. "If I had succeeded in what I planned to do there, none of this would have happened. Not just my work as a guardian, but all the ripple effects. The people Jake has saved, the conservation work Sarah is doing, the families that have been helped because we found a different path." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of interconnected consequences that they had all learned to perceive. Every choice creates infinite possibilities. The mountain helped us choose the ones that serve the greatest good. As they prepared to project back to the surface, back to their families and their ordinary responsibilities, all three carried with them the knowledge that they were part of something vast and purposeful. They were no longer just individuals living separate lives, but conscious participants in a web of protection and healing that stretched across the world. The mountain sang them to sleep that night with harmonics that spoke of ancient patience and infinite love, of work that would continue long after their own service was complete, of a future where the boundary between human wisdom and natural consciousness would grow thinner and stronger with each passing year. And in the morning, Sarah Mitchell would wake up in her ranger station. Jake would prepare for another rescue training session, and David would begin his new job as a wilderness therapy counselor, all of them carrying the mountain's light into a world that desperately needed the healing they had learned to provide.